Okay, so we're going to talk about the resource-based view now. So value chain, okay, so it's strengths and weakness, value chain analysis, not value system, that's external, value chain analysis. And now we're going to talk about the resource-based view. It's this whole idea that firms have resources, capabilities, competencies that make them competitive, that they help deliver value, and that's how they make money. But you want to know what those are so that you can continue to be more competitive. At this point, though, I want to talk to you about the relationship between resources, capabilities, and competencies, because it can be confusing and it shouldn't be. The original theory was called resource-based view, and that refers to tangible and intangible resources. Then at some point, somebody said this just does not quite capture what makes firms competitive, that's really valuable. So they came up with this idea of capabilities because it represents a more complex interrelationship of individuals and processes in the firm. Right, so an example of a resource, potash mine, clearly a resource. Somebody else might argue a capability could be the aesthetic that Apple has in all of its products. Right? It clearly identifies Apple's offering. It is of value to their customers, and it is kind of complex. I mean, it has an essence of being clean, but yet artistic. But how do you capture that as a tangible resource? So people would argue that's a capability. And then after this idea of capabilities comes the idea of competencies, and they're all related. A competency is basically a resource or capability that crosses business units in one corporation. And so in a large corporation, you might have business units or activities in different industries. Right? And you might have a capability that's important to the success of the organization across all of these business units. And so sometimes that is referred to as a competency. Let me give you an example. General Electric is known to have excellent management, right? Excellent management training programs, excellent, very disciplined management, and that's important to all of its business units, whether that is engines, lights, HVAC, heating and cooling, or finance. So that's a corporate competency. Now, nobody really cares out there in the real world if you call it a resource, a capability, or a competency. I just want you to know all three. I want you to know that they're related. And then if it's your boss who's making a big difference between capability and competency, of course you care. So let's talk about resources. Resources get broken up into tangible and intangible. I just gave you the example of a potash mine. That's a tangible resource. Having a specific geographic location on a very well-traveled intersection could be a tangible resource. Finances can be a tangible resource. Right? So in fact, here is a slide showing Whole Foods financial statements, just their financial position, not their whole financial statement. And as you can see, they're a little bit dated, but we can see what they have for revenue, for income. Right? We also can look at financial ratios. So we can look at financial position. We would say that's tangible. We can argue whether or not if it was in Bitcoin, if that's tangible or intangible resources. But if we say that there's money in the bank, it's a tangible resource. Now, if we look at these financial ratios, obviously a current ratio is going to give you an idea of how quickly they can pay off their debts. Right? So that's more of a tangible resource. But if we look at this ratio of inventory turnover, and as you can see, Whole Foods, it does much better than its competitors on average on that, as well as the inventory turnover days, that really hints at more of an intangible resource. There's definitely processes involved in having this effective of an inventory management system, right? Between buying and stocking and deciding which SKUs to put out there and how many to have. So much more of a capability. And so then to move on to intangible resources, we could say those can be a capability, honestly, but they also could be something like reputation or the brand, right? It could be these routines or processes that are embedded into the work that is done. Okay, so that's resource-based view. And then, as I said, capabilities really are just an extension of intangible resources. Right? I put in your recommended but not required reading this article by Ulrich and Smallwood, 2004. You may find it useful, but they talk about capabilities and are trying to give tools to leaders and managers in identifying and ranking their capabilities. So just like I said, the aesthetic skills or the aesthetic efforts of the products for Apple, that's a capability. And it's not a capability that's important to every organization. So you really have to figure out which capabilities are the ones that are important to your company, your value proposition, your strategy, and in comparison to your competitors. However, with that said, Ulrich and Smallwood give a list of what they consider to be the most common capabilities. And if you read that article, they will take you through this idea, this process, where you identify organizational capabilities that are important. Then you score your own firm. It's a numeric process. You score your own firm on how it does in each of these capabilities. And then you rank your firm against your competitors, right, to figure out if you have a distinctive competence, if you really are better at it than your competitors. Now, that's really important only if it's delivering value to your customer and increases the profits and revenues of your firm. Right? Some of the ones that they came up with, right? Collaboration and efficiency, innovation, customer connectivity, leadership learning, speed. So these will all depend on what type of business you are in. So let's talk about what makes a resource or a capability valuable. So a very famous article by Collis and Montgomery from 1995 talks about how do you measure that value. And so it gives these 5 questions as a test. 1, inimitability. Right? We do not want our resource to be easily imitated. The example, the potash mine. Right? It's hard to make more potash. There's a limited amount in the earth. Right? Durability. So how quickly does this resource depreciate in value? Now, I'm not saying for the customer, right? We might like it if the customer has to come back and keep replenishing because it gets used up, whatever we sell. But we want the value of our resource to be very durable. So continuing with the potash example, potash is used in farming. It's an essential nutrient. And farming's continuing and going to continue, and actually we're predicting more pressure on agriculture, right? So that's a very durable resource. The value of it's probably not going to depreciate. Appropriability. So appropriability is who really gets the value from that resource. So if I own a potash mine and I sell my potash, I'm getting the value. Makes sense. So how do you ever not appropriate your value? Think about Twitter. There is a lot of value in the Twitter sphere. Right? You have a network, people are posting information, live streams, news media, what's going on for events, funny videos, what did Ellen DeGeneres say, what did Jimmy Kimmel say, right? But there's value there. Twitter has not been successful at capturing that value. They have really struggled with monetizing what they offer. So who's appropriating that value? The users, right? Both the users who retweet, but also the organizations or personalities that are using it to increase their reach. So that's an example of appropriability. Another technology example of poor appropriability is Shazam. I don't know if you know this, but it is an app that if you turn it on, it listens to the radio. It will tell you what song you're listening to. Shazam couldn't figure out how to make money. Because, yeah, that's great. Well, let me say, they were making money because of click-throughs for people purchasing the song. But it really wasn't adding up to what they were hoping it would add up to. And so they've been more successful in ad campaigns and co-branding with companies like Nike. So they're trying to appropriate the value of what they offer. Okay, the fourth test is substitutability. Obviously, we don't want there to be an easy substitute. So potash, even though there's other nutrients that are used in agriculture, they do not replace what potash does. Right? So that's a very valuable resource, that mine. Right? So we don't want it easily substituted. I just read an article how Slack, the place where you can set up work groups kind of online and share information, is really starting to cut into Facebook, right? Because people are starting to use it for social reasons as well. And so that's cutting into Facebook's value offering. And then finally, competitive superiority. So if this resource is truly important to delivering value to the customer, to your strategy, the best thing is if you can be the top, the very best in any one of your competitors in that resource or capability. And so if you are, then it's called a distinctive competence. Right? So I just talked about General Electric and their management training program, their emphasis on management principles. That's considered a distinctive competence for General Electric. Okay, so how do you become inimitable, right? So let's talk about inimitability just a little more deeply. Well, physical uniqueness. We talked about the potash, right? It could be path dependency. Path dependency is a term that comes out of evolution. So there is a history of things that have occurred and changes or choices that have been made that then end up creating either the organism or, in our case, the organization and its unique composition, right? And so that could be very difficult to imitate. Think of the example of Burberry when we talked about opportunities and threats for Burberry. It'd be very difficult for another clothing design or lifestyle company to repeat what Burberry has been for the UK across history through World War I, World War II, and what that means to the British identity, right? So path dependency. Causal ambiguity or social complexity. So we could go back to the example of the aesthetic for Apple. Obviously, there's lots of designers involved, but it's also kind of complex how they come up with those designs. And then economic deterrence, right? Maybe it's a scale thing, right? So you have to be so large to deliver this value. So Uber is doing this. They are trying to become, the biggest network of this peer-to-peer or C2C ride sharing. And so just the sheer scale of being able to replicate that is an economic deterrence. Another economic deterrence is getting sued, right? So if another mobile phone comes out looking just like the iPhone, and that is trademarked, you can bet that there will be an economic deterrence pursued. Okay, so let's talk about durability a little bit more. The durability, being able to keep the value of that resource, is enhanced if you can put up barriers to imitation. And so that might be through intellectual property. That might be by absorbing another company that has those same capabilities or resources. Another way that your competitive advantage might be more durable is based on the capability of your competitors. They may have already made a strategic commitment or investment into another area, and so it makes it very difficult for your competitors to then find or take that investment out and redirect it. And then finally, industry dynamism. Some industries are more dynamic than others, and because of that, that durability can erode. So think of fashion. You could have a particular dress, shirt, shoes, watch, whatever it is, sunglasses, that are very valuable as a resource, but that might only be for one season because the fashion industry is very dynamic. All right, so we've talked about resource-based view, we've talked about capabilities, we've talked about how do you test the value of that resource. Now we're going to talk about competencies a little bit, right? Okay, so the core competency of a corporation, right? So we talked about that's capabilities that go across kind of everything that a corporation that might be in different business units might do. And for that, we tend to look at this article by Prahalad and Hamel, where they came up with this idea. And they came up with their tests for value for core competencies. So we just did the tests for resources. Now this is a test for core competencies. And they say, 1, it should give you access to a variety of markets. 2, it should contribute to the perceived value by your customer. And 3, it should be very hard to imitate. So it takes a little bit of what the resource-based view said and then tries to apply it across multiple markets. So here's an example from Honda. If you watch this advertisement by them, you can probably figure out what they think their core competency is and which one they invest in.